Welcome to episode 10 of Mark on Comms. First things first, a massive apology from me. I've kind of been absent, AWOL, over the last couple of weeks. Life has just been a bit chaotic and meant that I haven't been able to get our Mark on Comms episodes out as I usually would. So again, apologies from me. Hopefully it won't happen too often through the season. I'll definitely work my best to try and make sure I continue to bring these episodes. I've had comments back saying how much people are enjoying them, so I will continue to provide them for as long as people enjoy them as best I can. Today's episode slightly different. First round has now finished. We're in a kind of break week right now between the first and second round. So today's episode will be focused on reviewing that first round, giving you my thoughts and in particular, as always, my big takeaways from the action. So let's jump straight in, have a look at each of the four groups, and I can give you my thoughts on how things played out. Okay, so the four groups, certainly interesting to say the least. We'll go group by group and I'll give you my thoughts on each. So let's have a look at Group A first. So slightly surprisingly, top of the table, Lond head through, winning Group A with a 4-win, 2-loss record. I've spoken to you about Lond a million times. I started off as my fairy tale team, then they became my nightmare team because I just couldn't predict them. I'm going to go into them. They're definitely one of my key takeaways, so I'll give you a bit more on that later in today's episode. Skio with a 4-2 record coming in second. The start of the season for them was a hot one, but just couldn't quite hold on. Inconsistency for that Italian team certainly hurt them. And they didn't deal with adversity brilliantly in those tough games. Sometimes things they didn't necessarily were able to execute that plan B so effectively. Avenida feels like a team that's growing. Definitely had a slow start to the season. Seem to be finding their feet. Certain key pieces starting to come together, starting to gel a bit more. I think they'll probably push on in that second round. But again, you know, good to see them go through. I definitely think a team of the quality and experience that should be in the second round. And then finally, DVTK, 1-5 record. They will now drop down to the Eurocup Women's competition, which I will talk about again in my takeaways. And again, DVTK, the way I'd sum it up, and I don't want DVTK fans, players or coaches to take this the wrong way, just a little disappointing. I had a vibe from them early on in the season that they were ready to kind of take that next step. They were a bit of a fairy tale team last year and wondered if they were going to push on. And early on it felt like they were going to push on. That home win against Skio was certainly impressive, but they just didn't really find traction. They weren't able to convert any of those close games to win, and ultimately that cost them. So Group B, a different tale, wasn't as close as Group A. Group A was a real battle. Group B, Mersin just blew this one wide open. 6-0, weren't really challenged, won pretty much every game relatively easily. They progressed with that perfect record, just one of two teams that progressed through to the second round without losing a game. Bourges in the second spot, 4-2 record for them. It felt like Bourges were here proving a point. Missing out last season, coming in this season with absolutely a point to prove. Players like Astier coming into more leadership roles, now no longer really considered a young player or a junior, becoming one of the senior members of that squad and really picking up the mantle and carrying that one forward. But you feel that Bourges almost a bit of a chip on the shoulder in a really good way, not in a negative way, in a good way, has driven them forward. Third place, Zabini Brno, 2 wins, 4-loss record. Not a great record to take through to the second round, but that said, you have to give them credit. They really have put in some tough performances, and for me, the description I put down in my notes was a pleasant surprise. A team that have kind of come out of nowhere and really delivered some good performances and pushed some of those bigger teams quite hard. How they perform in the second round, still to be seen. A lot more big challenges coming their way in that second round. And then finally, Olympiacos. Well, the only way I summed this one up was they never really got started. At no point in any game did you feel like they had the traction, momentum or confidence to push on and take a win. I think there's going to be some soul searching in the Olympiacos team and in the club generally after an 0-6 record and not even a close 0-6 record. A lot to look at for how they come back next year, if they can come back next year, and how they become more competitive at this level. So we look at Group C. And again, another Turkish team dominating this one. Fenerbahce are reigning champions. And Fenerbahce are just being Fenerbahce. A 6-0 record. Yes, they got pushed hard by Polkovica on the road. Taken right down to the wire on that one. But outside of that, relatively comfortable in most of their games. Should be really, when you look at the depth of that roster, the quality. Yes, it's a slightly newish looking roster, not a load of returners from last year, enough returning from last year, but a strong start to their defence of their back-to-back titles. Now for Zaragoza, 4-2 record, heading forward after only just 2 losses in that group. Those 2 losses to Fenerbahce. Able to get rid of Polkovica, win both of those games, won both of the Villeneuve Das games. So really, we kind of see them as a strong team. One thing I would say is I don't think they've necessarily been challenged as much as maybe some of those other teams have that we put in that kind of second tier right now. It'll be interesting to see when we get to the second round and they face off against Valencia, Praha, Raya. That's when we'll see how far forward that they have come. Polkovica squeaked through in the end. 1-5 record. Same record as Villeneuve Dask in the 4th place, but Polkovica go through on that head-to-head basis. Haven't been overly convincing. A real roller coaster season for them in that first round. Had some good games, as I said, pushed Fenerbahce really hard. Then had some bad games where you just thought this isn't the Polkovica I was expecting. A little bit like DVTK. Slightly disappointed. Thought they were going to bring more than they did. However, unlike DVTK, they do get through to the second round. A massive uphill battle. They enter the second round with the worst record out of all of the 12 teams that go through. So they are really going to have to push on and push on hard in that second round, win early games for them to give themselves a chance. Then in 4th spot, Villeneuve Dask. It was a little bit upsetting and sad to see last year's runners-up bow out at the first round. Not massively unexpected. Clearly, a huge roster change. Majority of their key pieces from last season's title run kind of left in the summer. Offered bigger contracts elsewhere, no doubt. So, coach Messiaen left with a task of trying to rebuild that roster in the summer. To be fair, actually has brought some good pieces together, just hasn't quite been able to deliver the performances. It's taken them time to get some traction and get some momentum going, so they too will drop down into Eurocup Women. We now move across to Group D. Valencia, as expected, Valencia 5-1 record. Without doubt, they'd recruited to win this competition. Big names, lots of talent, lots of experience in that roster as well. No surprise that they've won Group D. Praha sitting in 2nd place, a 4-2 record for Praha. Praha are one of those teams that week after week are getting better and stronger. Obviously, we saw the arrival in the middle of the first round of Brianna Jones. We've seen last week the signing of Ezi Magbegor. My goodness me, they are bringing together a greatest hits of the recent years of Praha. Bringing back all of the big names that they've had in recent years and putting them into one roster. This looks like the best version I've seen of Praha over the last few years. I think they're going to really challenge in that second round and push on to the final 6. In 3rd place, we saw Raya, a little bit like their Italian counterpart, Schio, in Group A. You just didn't know which Umana Raya team were going to turn up each week. On their day, phenomenal, competitive, able to battle with anyone. But some weeks they just struggled to find a way to the win, find a way to get themselves into games, and ended up with a 3-3 record. Not a bad record to take through to the second round, particularly in Group D, probably the toughest, most competitive group of the 4 before the season started. So again, interesting to see how Raya try and find some consistency in the second round. And then finally in Group D, Győr. You kind of feel sorry for them. They leave with the same record as Olympiacos, 0-6. They'll drop down to Eurocup Women. You felt that they battled hard, though. They really did put in some big performances. They put in some tough performances. Just couldn't convert anything to a win. For me, just looking into that roster, they just lack one or two superstars, one or two focal points, particularly offensively, to get them to those wins, to push those close games across the line. Interested to see if they're back next season, how they approach that roster build, potentially in a different way than they did last year, or whether they're going to try and organically grow year on year. So that's my kind of take on the end of the first round, those four groups. Let's head across now and have a look at my key takeaways after the first round. So first, big takeaway from me from the end of round one is the Turkish teams Fenerbahce and Mersin are the real deal. The only two teams to leave the first round with a perfect 6-0 record. And you just have a feeling, and I think back to April when we were all in Mersin for that game, Fenerbahce against Mersin in the semi-finals, how hotly contested that was really for the first three quarters, and Mersin just struggling to stay the distance in that battle. They've recruited deeper, more talent this year. Is this a potential final matchup that we're going to see here? Fenerbahce and Mersin, I wouldn't put money against it happening. Certainly after round one, they are the two big hitters, the ones with the rosters with the big names, and also the ones with the rosters that have delivered, that have absolutely performed in that first round out of the opening gate and just won every game. You know, that's all you ask. Beat the teams in front of you. Mersin probably have done it with a little bit more ease than Fenerbahce at times, but don't get me wrong, this is two of the big hitters and the two early favourites to be in the final this year. From a personal standpoint, my big takeaway was Lond are my nemesis. I've just struggled to get my head around them. Every week I've made predictions. Early on, I was all on board for Lond in the first few games of the season. It just didn't happen for them to start with. But my goodness me, how they flipped the script in the second half of that first round. They went 3-0 in the last three games and powered their way to win their group, putting themselves in a great position to make it through to the final six. Obviously, tough ask in the second round, though. They'll come up against even tougher challenges in that second round. But what can I say? I have struggled to get my head around Lond, and I'm pretty sure I will continue to do so for the rest of this competition. If you watch my predictions, my advice would be do the opposite of what I do whenever Lond are involved in a game. Next takeaway from me is those four teams leaving us. Some of them, it's tough luck, the likes of DVTK for sure, Villeneuve d'Ascq. Olympiacos really have struggled. Győr battling but not quite there. Those four teams now drop down to Eurocup Women, and it is not going to be easy. If you've had a chance to look at any of the Eurocup Women stuff so far this season, that is another super competitive tournament. Big names going toe-to-toe against one another in that. Some surprise names coming through as well. Some smaller clubs that you wouldn't expect to be pushing on, absolutely getting it done in Eurocup Women. But if you just look at some of the recent Euroleague women's teams that are playing Eurocup Women this year, you'll get a feel of how difficult it's going to be for our four departing teams. We've got Asvel, BLM, Sopron, Galatasaray, Besiktas, Girona. These are teams that are playoff quality teams in some years in Euroleague Women's, and that is what our four teams are dropping down into. I think they probably should make it to the quarterfinals, but that is when they're likely to start meeting up with some of these other big hitters, some of these other teams that have very impressive rosters. But what I would say is if you have a spare moment alongside your Euroleague Women's watching, try and jump into the Eurocup Women's. It's definitely worth a watch. Some absolutely huge games coming up over the next few weeks and months in that competition. And then the final takeaway and the final piece I have for you in episode 10 today is this is a bit of a duh moment, but the new format really works. My goodness me, we're always skeptical of change, aren't we? I know I was a basketball fan. Oh, don't change something I love. Euroleague Women's has been brilliant for so long now, and you're going to mix it all up and you're jeopardising that. And you know what? Absolute hat tip to the people behind this format change. It has taken Euroleague Women's to the next level. Every game has been super exciting, so hard fought. Every game matters. Because of the new format, we don't have this protracted regular season where you can afford to lose 2 or 3 games and you'll get through to the playoffs, or you can maybe hold some of your playing budget back to later in the year and bring in some big hitters for the playoffs. You cannot afford to do that with the new format. From the moment of the opening tip of game one of the first round, you have to be all in. You can't afford to take a day off. You can't afford to take a week off. It's not going to happen. One loss completely can rock your season, can change it from flying to collapsing. And the drama that has brought with it in this first round has been wonderful. So again, a huge, huge hat tip to all of the people behind the new format. It absolutely works so far. One caveat I'm going to put on it: I'm not sure about the final six. I'm not supposed to say that. I'm sure I'm not. But do you know what? I trust them. I trust that the final six are going to be another amazing event. I used to love the final four best teams going toe-to-toe, classic structure. How will this new play-in system work? I don't know. And I think it's just fear of the unknown from me. I think once I get into it, once I see the games being played, once I see the raised stakes in all of those playing games, I think I'll probably fall in love with it, but I'm a little bit scared because it's into the unknown. I'm sure you'll be with me though as we progress through. Obviously, a second round starts up next week. And I will bring you a preview of the second round before those games get started. So tune in for episode 11. But that is all she wrote here for episode 10 here of Mark on Comms. Thank you so much for joining me. And as always, I'm sure I'll see you courtside soon.